Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Albers, and welcome to This Week in Anderson on the USBN Sports podcast. And as always, I'm joined with my co-host, Steve Ellis. And Steve, I'll tell you what, I'm super excited for our next guest, Jim Leyritz. Is someone that I remember you and I growing up watching him play sports, and obviously with the Anderson-Turpin battles and baseball and basketball, and then in particular watching him and Joe Dayton go after it. I that was just the best time as a young guy watching those guys play, but then also knowing that he was from our town playing in the major leagues and watching him in the World Series is just awesome to get to talk to Jim.
It's so cool because back then, I mean, even now, I mean, I'm like nervous talking to him because it's like larger than life. Because when we were in eighth grade, when he was a senior and duking it out against Joe Dayton and Frank Brandy and those guys, it was just so cool to watch. But the other thing is that being on This Week in Anderson is that we've been fortunate now that we've had a ex-major leaguer player from Turpin now, and from Anderson, which was Rich Dotson, and from McNick, which was Pat Tabler. So it was really, really cool.
Yeah. So all very, very good friends of my family.
Oh, good.
That's awesome. Yeah,
my brother was the same age as Rich, and they all hung out together.
Okay.
And then Pat Tabler dated Nancy Teakin, who lived right next door to my house, so I saw Pat all the time over there. So,
oh my gosh, wow,
small world,
small world.
Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned such an important person, even though he was my rival in high school. It was Joe Dayton, and Joe Dayton. There's a story I tell in my book. The Catching Heat that I wrote. There's a story I tell about him that I was ready to quit in AA, and I was struggling. I called my dad up and said, "Dad, I don't think I'm going to play anymore." I got hit in the face the first game of the season, missed a couple games, and I tore ligaments in my ankle. And I was just like, and Joe had just been released by the Dodgers, and he was back home working for Nabisco.
Okay,
and he was making $50,000, and I'm making $800 a month. And I called him up and said, "Joe, dude, I think I'm gonna come home." And he goes, "Jimmy, do not come home." He said, "I wish I would have kept going." He said, "I'm making 50 grand, yes, but I'm going to be making 50 grand for the next 10 years unless I get promoted."
Right.
And it's not that easy in Nabisco to get promoted. You had an opportunity. They're still giving you a uniform. Don't come home. And between him and my dad, they convinced me to say, "You know what? Stick it out." And to this day, I tell Joe all the time, "Thank you," because I was wavering whether I wanted to keep going.
That's a great story. And I'll tell you what, we interviewed Joe too, and he talked about you too. And it's just for Steve and I, like we said, a little nervous about talking to you because we idolize you guys, growing up and watching you guys play. So it's we really appreciate you joining us. And so let's kind of get back to the beginning. Let's talk about growing up in Anderson Township, and like where did you, what side, or where did you live growing up in Anderson?
We lived right off State Road. We were right there, yeah. And let's see, we basically we lived in the same house. We moved there in 1970, and I did not leave until I left for spring training for the Yankees in 1986.
Wow,
that's crazy.
Where'd you move from when you moved here in 70?
I was born in Cleveland.
Okay.
So we were in Ohio, and we had a big family. My dad had like 6 brothers and sisters and other things, and they just had a huge family. My dad was the first one to kind of leave the nest and go down to Cincinnati because he was working for IBM, and he got transferred. And in 1970, just when they were closing Crosby Field and opening up Riverfront, we moved down to Cincinnati. And then, of course, I became best friends with Tommy Brenneman over the years. And he's another reason why him and Marty taking our family to spring training in Tampa during those years, getting an opportunity to meet Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, staying in the team hotel was one of the reasons that inspired me to, hey, you know what? I'm really good at basketball. I can go to college, but I can play pro baseball. I want this lifestyle. And I thank Tommy and Marty for all that.
Wow. That's awesome.
And growing up on State Road, you're super close to Anderson.
Yeah. Well, again, all my friends were, Joe Dino Tidball,
Dino.
Pino.
yeah, Frank Brandy,
Yeah.
those guys were all good friends. Matter of fact, I can't remember his name, but it was my sophomore year. I was pitching.
Okay.
I think it was Davis, Don Davis. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
He was hitting for Anderson,
Okay.
and he was really good. I say he's good friends. I can't even remember his name, but I was pitching, and I drilled him in the face, and I broke his eye socket, and it was the last time I ever pitched.
Really?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah,
I think it was Danny Davis.
Davis. Okay, yeah.
I think it was Danny.
That. So back then on State, State, I'm just trying to think where that split would have been for Anderson.
Well, it was Pinehurst was the neighborhood.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we lived on Eglinton Road.
Okay.
And so it was interesting because we had, myself, then we had the Rastani brothers, who were the big baseball players at McNick.
Yep.
And then of course, like I said, the Teakins lived across the street. Danny went to McNick, the boy, but the girl was dating Pat Tabler, so he was over there all the time. So we were surrounded by, and Rich Dotson was my brother's best friend. And unfortunately for my brother, he was 4 years older. Anytime he wanted to go play with his buddies, my mom always said, take your brother with you. Play against those guys when I was 4 years younger. It was pretty cool.
That is pretty unbelievable. Cool. So, all right. So when you were growing up here and you started getting into sports, obviously being friends with Tom Brennan helps on the baseball aspect of it. But what other sports did you play?
Well, basketball was my number one sport until after my junior year, when I decided to concentrate mostly on baseball. But yeah, my dad played basketball at Kent State University.
Okay.
He really wanted me to pursue basketball. And the reason why is because as a freshman, I was 5'11". And I graduated 5'11". At the time, as a freshman, I was the biggest kid in school, and I was dominating.
Yeah.
And but eventually, after my junior year, my dad basically grabbed me and said, "Jimmy, listen, you got some good scholarships, Indiana State, a couple of the not the big schools, but good schools." Yeah. And he said, "You could go to college and be a decent basketball player, maybe start, maybe make the team, but you can play pro baseball. What do you want to do?" And I think I made the right choice.
Absolutely did.
Well, if I remember correctly, I think you were weren't you in the top 10 in scoring in the city?
Yep. Yeah. Before the 3-point line.
Well, I was just going to say that. Yeah. I mean, we interviewed Tim Ferguson, and we talked about he would probably average 7 more points a game if he had a 3-point line back then.
That's good.
I remember those battles, Danny. You could talk about it. I mean, because I just look forward to it so much. The Anderson Turpin games.
Oh yeah, just those basketball games that you had, and just watching not only Joe and Frank so talk a little bit about that, like those battles that you guys had back in the day. How packed those gyms were, and how crazy it was for those gyms.
It kind of reminded me, not quite as intense as the Yankee Red Sox rivalry. But for a local high school, it was pretty intense. It was pretty big, and I looked forward to it. And I think it was my sophomore year. We were winning, and I shot a free throw, and I missed it, and they came down and they scored the winning basket. Really? They beat us with no seconds left. And all I could think about that entire junior year was get that opportunity again. And sure enough, my junior year, I think it was double or triple overtime, I hit the game-winning basket to win. It was pretty. So that rivalry was pretty cool.
Who were some of the guys that played with you? I remember, was Butch Newman or Nimmo?
Butch Nimmo, yeah. And Nimmo was there my sophomore year when we lost.
Okay.
Because I made varsity as a sophomore.
Yeah.
And then my junior year, we had 11 juniors, and I think it was Mike Runnels and Wiesenheim our 2 seniors. Yeah. And we ended up going to the state finals, and we lost to Western Hills. We beat Taft, who we were never supposed to beat. I scored my most points at 33 points in a playoff game. Wow. And then we played Western Hills the next day, and we lost. But we got to the state finals, and then we came back our senior year thinking, all of us juniors would be so much better. And we did good, but we didn't quite do as well as we thought we would.
Hey, you know what else, Jim, was I think back in the day, that was when you were in that Hamilton County league where it was Mount Healthy and Oak Hills and Coleraine, and those teams were just, I mean, the league was brutal.
Yeah, the biggest name that came out of all that was Greg Stokes,
Yeah.
who went on to Iowa and then played a little bit in the pros. I remember playing against him. I think he might have been Forest Park. I'm not sure, but
I think you're right.
But yeah, it was there were some pretty good teams back then.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you play against Eric Caddis too?
Yes, Eric Caddis, Bill Wegman.
Yeah,
Bill Wegman. Wow.
Was Billy Doran? Was he older than you?
He was a little bit older. Yeah, I missed him. My freshman year was his senior year.
He was at Mount Healthy.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, back in mine, from the baseball side, Barry Larkin and I were teammates in the summer every year for Midland. Of course, Joe was on that team. So a lot of the high school, the really cool thing about back then, we didn't have all those travel teams and all that. We had the one team Midland. And if you were good enough to make Midland, you were kind of like the cream of the crop.
Right.
And Barry Larkin and I were pretty much roommates during age 15, 16, 17, and 18 with the Midland Redskins.
Wow. How about that?
That's unbelievable. That's what you talk about, an unbelievable team right there. So after high school, let's talk a little bit after high school. So what was that recruiting like? You said, you basketball, you had the baseball. What were you getting a lot of offers for both, or was it just one over the other?
So this is a crazy story. All right. And I tell this story all the time because a lot of Atlanta Braves, they can't stand me because we beat them, 96, 98, 99, 2000. Yeah. I'm not really well liked in Atlanta because I hit a home run pretty much in one of those series. But Hep Cronin, who used to be a scout in Cincinnati.
Yep.
All right. Of course, Mick Cronin, he's coaching at UCLA now.
Yeah.
And, but Hep was a scout in Cincinnati. And after my senior year, it was like 4 days before the draft. He called up my dad and he said, "Hey, listen, back then they could talk to your parents.
Okay.
They can't do it so much anymore. But they called my dad and said, "Hey, we're thinking about making Jimmy our top pick. Does he want to go to college or is he signable?" And my dad said, "Well, make him an offer and let's see. I know he wants to play pro ball." That morning, while my dad was getting this phone call from Hep, I was out playing tennis against a guy named Todd Blaine, who was our number one player on our tennis team. And I used to kid him all the time that if tennis wasn't the same time as baseball, I would be the number one on the tennis team. And so we went out to play for a case of beer. And the first set, I go up for a smash and I turn my ankle and I fractured the side of my foot.
Oh,
no.
Todd drives me to the doctor. We find out it's just a hairline fracture, 2 weeks. It'll be, just stay off it. I'll be fine. So they put an air cast on it. And I come walking into the house and my dad goes, "What the hell did you do?" I said, "Not a big deal, Dad." I go, "I'll be okay in 2 weeks." And he's like, "Oh, it's a big deal. I just got a phone call from Hep Cronin and they were going to make you a draft pick in 4 days. Now I got to tell him you got a broken ankle." So sure enough, Hep called back the next day and my dad told him the story. And he goes, "You know what? We'll come back and look and watch him play in 5 weeks." So 5 weeks later, they came and watched me play in a tournament with Midland. And they went to my dad and said, "Hey, I know he can't squat yet because the foot's not ready, but we'll sign him. What would it take?" And my dad said, "Give him 10 grand. And back then, 150,
Right.
200,000 was the number one pick.
Right.
So they came back to my dad the next day and said, "We can only give him 5. And my dad said, "Screw that. He's going to junior college." So I went to Middle Georgia Junior College for 2 years. Went to University of Kentucky, never got drafted. All right. But I wasn't catching. I was playing third base, the outfield, because my foot wasn't fully healed yet.
Okay.
So after my junior year at Kentucky, I went out to Hayes, Kansas, and played in a collegiate league and told the coach out there, "I want to start catching." And sure enough, I went back to catching. I was playing in a tournament in late August, and the scout came up to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing catching?" I said, "I can catch." They just wouldn't let me do it at Kentucky because the starting catcher was the nephew of our coach. And so I said, I never caught. He goes, well, they told us you couldn't catch.
Really?
I said, well, you just watched me catch 3 days. And he goes, I don't care. You can hit. I'm signing you. So I signed the next day with the New York Yankees. Now, the great thing about this story, and I'll make it quicker because it goes forever. The great thing about this story, in 1996, we'll talk about it later, but in 1996, I hit the home run against Atlanta. Hep Cronin is sitting in John Schuerholz's booth
No
for the Atlanta
way.
Braves. He was an Atlanta Brave scout.
Sure.
And he
Oh
said,
my
do
God.
not tell him for $5,000, we could have changed this entire scenario. And my dad, to this day, or until my dad passed away in June, never let Hep live that down.
Oh,
Going,
that
look
is
what happened to the Braves. Look what happened to the Yankees. He would have never been a Yankee.
that is great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Wohlers would have been happy if you took that
Yes.
$5,000.
That's a great story.
That's
Oh,
funny. All right, so going through all that and obviously having a good college career to get you signed by the Yankees. Tell us about that point in your life and that feeling of accomplishment of getting to that level. Obviously you climbed much more levels, but just being there.
Well, I was very fortunate. Everybody remembers my dad back in the day because he would sit behind in basketball and scream and yell, and and every parent told my father, "You're going to ruin that kid. You're going to ruin him." And my dad's like, "Nope, I know my son." My dad was a cross between Woody Hayes and Bobby Knight.
Nice.
If I went 2 for 4, why didn't you go 3 for 4?
Right.
Scored 20 points, why didn't you score 30? He was always like, never be satisfied. And then with Tommy Brenneman taking me to spring training, I got an opportunity to meet Pete Rose. And picking up the balls, and when he would hit extra batting practice, picking up the balls, I got a chance to speak to him a little bit. And I asked him one day, as a 14-year-old kid, and said, "Hey, Pete, how do you handle this? Your clutch. How do you do this?" And he told me as a young kid, he said, "Jimmy, I practice every time I have an at bat, like it's my last at bat, whether it's spring training, whether it's the first game of the season, whether it's the World Series, no matter what, that one at bat, I practice it year round. So therefore, whenever I do get into a situation where the moment outside is bigger, it's all about the bat. It's not about anything else. So I don't get caught up in the fans, in the moment." And I think, honestly, I look back at my career, and that was me. I wanted to be up and take the last shot in the basketball game. I wanted to be the last hitter up with the runner in scoring position. It really, really was a mindset that him and my father instilled in me. And here's the great story with my dad. I get called up to the New York Yankees. I come walking in the stadium for my first time. I'm looking around. We didn't have cell phones back then, so I couldn't take a selfie and go, "Hey, Dad, I'm on the field." Couldn't do that. So I walk into the locker room and I say, get on the clubhouse phone. I call him up and I said, "Dad, you're not going to believe this. I'm at Yankee Stadium. I've made it. Don Mattingly is in the locker next to me.
Oh, wow.
This is unbelievable."
Wow.
And he said, son, that is great. Now, what are you going to do to stay there?
Wow.
It was always about that next goal.
Right.
And, okay, great. Be happy you're there. But why are you there? And where do you want to get to? It was all about just keep going. And I honestly think that, because of him, that's what drove me to have the moments and be able to come through in those moments and not get caught up in them.
So, Jim, was that your first at bat? Didn't you get hit on your first at bat?
Yeah, when I got caught up in Baltimore.
Yeah,
but then that first night in Yankee Stadium, I got a pinch hit against Roger Clemens, and I got a base hit.
No kidding.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was that pretty nerve-wracking?
My first at bat.
Was that nerve-wracking for you to be up?
Pretty cool.
Was that nerve-wracking for you to on that first at bat at I guess it was Camden Field. Was it Camden Yards back then? And what that feeling was like at your first time getting in there for the major leagues? Were you
Camden Yards? Yeah. Yeah, you know what it was? It's one of those things that you can't think too much because we didn't have time. We literally got to the ballpark. Alan Mills and I got called up from AAA. We literally got to the ballpark, and there was no batting practice. So we didn't even have time to get to batting practice. And, and so the game started, and I'm sitting on the bench, and, we were losing. And Greg Olson, who was the Orioles' great closer, who was 12 for 12 in saves, or 13 for 13 in saves. And Buck Showalter comes up to me in the 7th inning and says, "Hey, you should stay loose because Stump likes to get you guys in there right away. When you get brought up." He said he's liable to throw you in there at any time. So I go into the locker room, start stretching, start swinging the bat a little bit to get loose, and I see Olson warming up, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm not going to hit against him. He's right-handed, and the best closer in the game right now." And sure enough, I get out there, and Steve Sachs is batting. Wayne Tollison was on deck, and Stump goes, "Leyritz, get up on deck." And there was 2 outs. So I'm thinking Sachs is going to make an out, and the game's going to be over.
Right.
Well, Sachs got a base hit. He gets on first. I get my first major league at bat, and I didn't know much about Greg Olson. I didn't, it was my first day in the big leagues. So he threw a 58-foot breaking ball, and I swung at it. Wasn't even close, but it got past the catcher, and Steve Sachs got to second base. And at the time, it was a 2-1 score. So he throws me another breaking ball. I swing at it and miss again. Then he threw me a fastball for a ball. Then he threw me another curveball, and I hit a line drive down to first base. Just foul. But I got a little confidence.
Yeah,
Like, okay. So sure enough, he threw me another one, and he hung it. I got a base hit. We tie up the game. And I got my first, they threw the ball to Randy Milligan. I got the ball.
That's cool.
But then we go out for the bottom half of the inning in a 2-2 game. They load the bases with 1 out, and I'm playing third. And Randy Milligan, again, hits the ball down the line and make a great play. I can't get back to the bag, so I try to throw it home to Matt Noakes, and I one-hopped him, and he missed it, and we lost the game. So it was kind of a bittersweet beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Jim, the thing that they called you the king, and that was because of all I went back, and before we had this interview, and I just literally went on YouTube and watched all your home runs and all the events that you had in the World Series. And the one that we talked about earlier that sticks out to me was against Wohlers in 1996 against the Braves when you hit that 3-run home. That's just an incredible moment. I mean, to be in a World Series and to hit a home run like that, you've had so many moments, not only for the Yankees, but for the Padres too as well. I mean, it's just got to be an unbelievable experience.
Yeah, our very first time in the playoffs in 1995, we were playing that season for Don Mattingly because we knew it was going to be his last season. I came up and I hit the walk-off home run in the 15th inning against the Seattle Mariners. And I never thought I could hit a bigger home run ever. But then we lost the next 3 games. So that home run kind of became a footnote. And everybody always asked me, "Man, when you hit that one in 96 in the World Series, you must have been floating around the bases." And I was like, no, because all I could think about was I just tied the game. Yes, it swung the momentum great. But if we don't win, it's a footnote.
Right.
That's right.
And, and I always say, thank God Wade Boggs got walked, because if he got a base hit, that would have been the biggest hit in the history of the Yankees. Because he got walked, he doesn't get a whole lot of credit.
Right.
My home run is the thing they turn to, and they say that changed the entire World Series.
Absolutely.
But here's the best part of that story. Not 96, but it reared its head in 97 when the Yankees got beat. And Mariano Rivera gave up a home run to Sandy Alomar in the Cleveland Indians to lose their playoff game. And George Steinbrenner walked into Gene Michael's office and said, "Get rid of Torrey. We're trading Mariano. I'm tired of watching this crap."
What?
Oh, my.
Yeah.
No way.
And Gene Michael used to tell the story. He said, I looked at him and said, "George, did you forget about last year?"
Yeah.
And Gene always used to tell me when he saw me after my playing career, he goes, "You and the 96 team, your home run and the 96 team are the reason we have a dynasty, because Mr. Steinbrenner, had you lost in 96, he would have got rid of Torrey. He would have traded Mariano." And you think about that scenario.
That is nuts. That is absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
Think about that. God darn.
That's
That's crazy.
unbelievable.
Some
Did you
pretty
play with
special
O'Neal?
moments in New York.
Did you play with Paul O'Neal too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Paul came to the Yankees in 1992 for
Okay.
Roberto Kelly. Yeah.
That was a horrible
He didn't
trade.
get along. He wasn't getting along with Lou Piniella and Champ Summers in Cincinnati. So they sent him to New York.
Yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, it wasn't a very good trade.
Jeez,
I mean, on our part, on the Reds' part.
On the Reds' part, yeah. So you were talking about how Pete and your dad especially prepared you, and Danny's talking about all these big moments that you relish in and just love to be in the spotlight there. Well, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, because when you compare, like when you're talking about like Pete and his approach and his stance, even, well, you had a unique stance too, that you rarely see anymore, with the front leg stiff. And so how did that all come about?
So again, we go back to before I broke my foot. I wore number 14. I batted like Pete. I got down in a little crouch.
Yep.
But when I broke my foot, and Hep Cronin told my dad, we'll come watch him in 5 weeks, I did not want to be like just sitting around waiting. So I put a cast on my foot that I could hit on. And it was my left leg where the cast was. So I couldn't put pressure on it. So I just stiffened it and just took batting practice with a stiff front leg. And all of a sudden I was like hitting the ball with more power and everything else.
No
and
way.
That's where that stance came from. It's funny because I used to teach lessons to kids, and the parents would go, you had a unique batting stance. Can you teach my kid how to hit like that? I go, yeah, break his leg.
That's it. Secret formula, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to talk to you about your family and where they're at, and you got kids, where they're at. But the one thing I want to be sure to bring up is about your dad. I know he pushed you hard, and unfortunately he passed last year. But I can tell you, all during your career, it didn't matter if I was at Beachmont Mall or Kroger's or any restaurant. And it didn't matter if it was summer or winter. He had his Yankees jacket on proudly, wearing that around town. You always knew who your dad was.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those typical things where he was living his life through me. Like I mentioned before, my older brother was a 10 times better athlete than me. He just didn't really want to play much past high school, and my dad kept trying to push him. And I was like, Dad, leave him alone. You can do that to me. I don't care. I want to play pro ball. And so we had that relationship. And it was one of those things. Like I said, I don't think until I retired from the game of baseball, when I made the decision to not to pursue a contract with the San Diego Padres, because I had just taken custody of my 3 boys, and my ex-wife had some drug problems, that the judge in Florida said, if you go back to play, you will not keep custody of your kids. And they were 2, 7, and 9 at the time. Oh. And I had called my dad up and said, it's a $1 million contract. I can get my money back, and he's like, Jimmy, I can't tell you what to do, but you know how I raised you. And the way he raised me was, he didn't take job promotions to make sure our family, my brother, my sister, and I grew up in Cincinnati. And sure enough, the next day I called him up and said, you're right, Dad. I'm not playing. I'm not letting these kids be raised by a drug addict. I quit and I was done. And that was the first time, even after all the home runs, World Series, that was the first time he said, you know what, son, you've made me proud.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's really what my dad and mom were all about. They loved the baseball. They loved the fact that I made it, but they liked the fact that I grew up as a man that they raised. That even though I went through some crazy times and I lost faith for a while and things, but whenever I was in doubt, I came back to the way I was raised by my mom and my dad, and they were pretty proud of that.
You should be proud too. So give us an update on your boys.
So I have 3 boys and 2 stepdaughters. I've been married. I've been out in California since 2011. I met my wife actually in New York, my current wife in New York. crazy story. I was telling her what I was going through. At that time, I was going through my trial that I was going through 3 years for DUI manslaughter. And I had read a book called The Purpose-Driven Life that had given me strength to not take a plea, not take the easy way out, but fight for the truth. Because I knew once I got to court that, yes, I shouldn't have been drinking and driving, but I wasn't guilty of causing the accident. But I had to wait for my day in court. Well, sure enough, I met this girl during that time. She had no idea who I was. When I told her everything I was going through, she's like, oh my God, I've heard about you. This restaurant that I go to, the bartender says, this great guy I should meet. As soon as he mentioned DUI manslaughter, I was like, why would I want to meet that guy? Like, I can't believe you and I have been talking for an hour and a half and you're that guy. What are you going through? And I told her everything. And then she's like, but you seem so normal. How do you handle it? I said, I read this book called The Purpose-Driven Life by this pastor named Rick Warren. And she looked at me with like a white face. I'm like, oh God, I played the God card. She's gone. Yeah. And she said, that's the pastor of my church. I go to his church in California.
Oh my
Wow.
No way.
Wow.
So, you can imagine, the aura of that. And so we started talking, we dated. She got to a point where she was like, I'm falling in love with you. And, I'm afraid of what might happen. So I had her come down and read all the evidence and all the depositions. And she's like, she took 3 hours to do it. And she came out of the room and she goes, you're going to be innocent of the manslaughter. I said, yeah, I know. I just have to wait for my day in court. And she stayed with me through the entire thing. And once it was over, the judge called me in and said, Mr. Leyritz, this should have never went to court. We had no idea the state attorney was running to become a judge, and she was using your name to try to promote her career. Where do you want to go? Because you can't stay here because she lives in your neighborhood, and you just embarrassed her in on national TV.
Right.
Because court TV covered my case.
Yeah.
And he goes, wherever you want to go. And at that time, I had met Rick Warren, who wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. I was pretty serious with my girlfriend. I had custody of the boys. I said, I'm going to California. I'm going to go become a member of the church, and I'm going to live the rest of my life in California with Michelle and her two daughters. Okay. So we've been together since 2011. We lived separately for 2 years. The boys and the girls got to know each other, and we all moved in 2013. My boys are now 28, 27, and 22. Wow. They all live separately in California, less than 5 miles from me. And then I have 2 stepdaughters who I've raised since they were 6 and 9, who are now a junior at TCU, studying PA, and a senior in high school, just graduating in June 1st. And she's going to college here in New York in Marist. So I'll have both of my girls on this coast and all my boys on the West Coast.
Wow.
That's an awesome story. That is
great story. Yeah.
I wrote a book called Catching Heat. Yeah. After we're done, email me your addresses. I'll send you a copy of it. It came out in 2011, and it was all about leaving the game of baseball, becoming the best teammate of all, and that was Dad. But it was called The King and Dad. And then in 2007, it was supposed to come out with HarperCollins. I had the accident. They put it on the shelf. I wrote 3 more chapters all about what I went through during trial and everything that happened to me. And we renamed the book. We put 3 more chapters in. We renamed the book Catching Heat because I was a catcher. And I caught a lot of heat in the courtroom. So it was appropriate.
Yeah.
And it came out in 2011. And I've been living my life, with the Purpose-Driven Life ever since 2008.
Good for you.
I can't wait to get that book from you, but then I'm also going to get that Purpose-Driven Life too, just to check that out too, because I recommend that to a lot of people that are going through, trying to figure out. A lot of people are going through divorces. But anybody who just wants to go, you know what? I'm not really sure what my purpose is. And it's the great thing about it as an athlete. It's only 1 chapter a night for 40 nights. Yeah.
So it's pretty easy to read. And I literally read it every night. From 2008 till I went to trial, in 2010, just to kind of give me that encouragement to fight that battle, to not take. Rick Warren said a prayer over me when I met him a year before my trial, and he said, "Let the jury be just. Let them see through the smoke and mirrors of what they're trying to create. but most of all, give Jimmy the strength to see it to the end. And
Wow.
those words came to light 2 months before trial because all of the evidence about the other driver, drunk, cocaine, all the other things that were our slam dunk case got thrown out. And my attorney came to me and said, you need to take a plea. You need to take 10 years probation, 5 years, no license, felony on your record, but you won't go to jail. And you can raise your kids.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, I have it on better authority through my faith to see this to the end. I'm not taking the easy way out. And it was hard. It was hard. But 17 days of trial, everything came out and it all worked out to where God had a hand on everything.
Jim, I'm gonna tell you something. I've been through something similar to what you had too. I was charged with vehicular homicide too, and I was, mine was non-drinking as well and all that. And the what you go through and something like that, people don't understand the how tough it is mentally, and it drained me kind of the same way with you. And I kind of had a moment too as well where they wanted us to do certain, my lawyers like, absolutely not. We're gonna fight. So to hear some of the things that you went through, or some of the same exact things that I went through, it's pretty awesome to hear. And I'm glad that you brought it up, and I'm kind of talking about it really for the first time openly to everybody. But it's a great moment that I had a moment with too, where I just did a quick prayer and it, you know what I mean? So that's awesome that you shared that with us.
Well, Dan, if you remember, you remember maybe the name Kenny Arbino.
Yeah.
Kenny had the same thing happen just recently, about a year ago. He was coming around a turn. The sun was right in his eyes early in the morning, 8 o'clock, not drinking, nothing that would cause the accident. But there was 2 people walking across the street, and he hit them, and unfortunately they passed, and all these things were happening. And he actually reached out to me because he knew what I went. And I recommended the Purpose-Driven Life to him. And literally a month later, he called me up and said, thank you, because you just saved me. He said, I'm still struggling with what I'm going through, but that book has given me the strength to get through this and know that there's a reason for things happening, and it's not always good, but we'll get through it. And it's again, I recommend that book. Matter of fact, I have a social media group now because I'm getting back on the radio in New York on 9:70 a.m. starting on Monday.
Good.
And they just put out on Instagram today, on my Instagram, me talking about what the Purpose-Driven Life did for my life. So that's something you should check out.
Jim, that's awesome, because like you said too, there's unfair things that people say, and they were saying the same thing about me. They were saying I was drunk, I'm a drug addict. They don't even know me. There's these people that are saying the same thing. So I'm thank you for sharing that, because that means, because I felt something because you said that, because I've been through the same thing. So that's pretty cool. And I want to also talk about real quick before we wrap this up is all the things you do charity wise. You've been involved with foundations with the 9/11 Education Trust, the Lou Gehrig's disease, and also the national spokesman for Pink Tie. You obviously love doing a lot of this stuff. So talk a little bit real quick about some of the charitable things that you've done and that you're still doing right now.
Well, when you play for George Steinbrenner, the first thing he says is, if you don't give back, then your career is wasted. The reason you have this platform, and you've been given a platform, that if you don't use it for good, then you all that talent you had is wasted. And he always really taught us how to give back. He always had a saying too, if you are doing something for somebody and more than one person has to know about it, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. That's the way George was. And he really instilled that. My mom and dad instilled that in me also. And I had a situation happen to me in 1996. In June of 96, it was adoption month in New York. And there was these 2 little boys on the cover of the New York Post. And at the time, my ex-wife was pregnant. At the time, we were married. And she saw this article in the New York Post that said, 2 little boys want a daddy and they want to go to a Yankee game. And she came into my room and said, hey, you think we could do something? And I said, absolutely. Let's call them up. So we called up the newspaper. We got a hold of the kids or the foster care that they were in. And we said, we want to bring these boys to a game. long story short, brought the boys to the game, got the awareness. October 23rd, I hit the home run.
Wow.
The next day, I'm doing articles, getting interviewed, and I got to catch Andy Pettitte in Game 5 that night. And I'm on the phone constantly from 8 in the morning until 10. And I finally said to my wife, no more phone calls. I got to get some sleep. And she comes right back in the room 5 minutes later. I go, what do you want? And she said, you need to take this call. And it was the woman who wrote the article who was calling. Her name is Susan Forrest. She called up and said, I just want to let you know, this is not about your home run or anything like that. Those 2 little boys that you sponsored and you brought to the game, they got adopted into a family yesterday.
Wow.
Whoa.
To say you hit your home run.
That's awesome. That is just a great
really, as much as I was on a high moment that boys were going to wake up to someone who there's never going to be an opportunity that I'm going to miss where I can give back to help other people. And that's basically what I've been doing. And ALS is a big one because my sister, Lori Leyritz, was married to a guy named Joe Turner, who in 2010 lost a 2-year battle to ALS and died at the age of 50. So ALS personally affected our family, and I do a lot of work with them also. But any opportunity, I play in 40 golf outings a year for charities, for foundations. I do the auctions, a lot of them, just to try to raise more money. It's just something, like I said, when you've been blessed with what I've been blessed with as a non-drafted young kid out of Cincinnati, Ohio, to be where I'm at. It's funny, just today, I did an appearance at Yankee Stadium, and the one fan said to me, do you ever get tired of this? Talking about everything. And then I go, listen, at 26 years old, when I first signed my Yankee contract, if you would have told me at age 60, they're still bringing me back and paying me to do all these things. People want to meet me.
Yeah.
I would have been, where do I sign that piece of paper?
Yeah.
Right now.
It's just been a great experience. And again, I never forget where I came from. So I did another interview for Robin Anderson's sister, Dawn Anderson, who does an Ohio State University podcast. I did for her because of that relationship that I had with her sister, who I went to high school with.
Okay. See, that's great because we were hoping that we would do this for a long time, and it really means a lot to us. That I think everybody in Anderson's just going to love this. I know we put it out there a while back that we had you and some other guests on there, and everybody's like, I can't wait. Kevin Keefe was one of the first ones that responded, said he can't wait to hear. So we appreciate that. So Jim, we try to wrap this up, and I know it's probably going to be hard for your major league part of it, but we try to do like your favorite memories. So from your favorite high school memory, maybe a college, and then obviously your major league. That might be a little bit tough, but go ahead and start. Maybe you got a favorite high school memory?
Well, on the basketball side, making that winning basket in triple overtime against the Anderson Redskins.
Hey, thanks for saying Redskin.
Exactly. I refuse to change that.
Thank you.
We agree with that.
On the baseball side, really, my probably greatest memory was when John Bassaliga grabbed me my sophomore year. He was our coach, and he grabbed me and he said, listen, you're different than the other guys. You got a lot of talent. You can go play college. You might even be able to play pro. I'm going to be harder on you than I am the other guy. Don't take it personal.
Oh, wow.
And that's the way he treated me. Again, I had my dad doing it too, so I had a lot of backup. But Bassaliga was one of the reasons why I was pursuing baseball, why I continued to work hard every single day because he pushed me from my sophomore year on.
That's great. What about you got a college one by any chance?
So college, it's funny. We were at a reunion and University of Kentucky, and these guys were telling me the story about, because I was talking about hitting walk-off home runs in the pros,
right?
And they're like, you don't remember the 3 or 4 that you hit the Riot Cats? I go, no, I didn't. I never hit a walk-off home run in college. And they're like, yes, you did. You hit 3 in 1985. And I'm like, really? My college memories are a little bit bleak,
Yeah.
But I do remember 2 years at Middle Georgia Junior College going to Grand Junction, Colorado to play in the Junior College World Series. So that was pretty cool. And then, of course, in the major leagues, probably the greatest memory is the walk-off home run against I know I should say the Braves, but the walk-off home run in the Seattle Mariners playoff is the greatest memory, but probably the most important moment in Yankee history for my career would have been the 96 home run.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to say, shoot, I was watching all those other ones. You had those ones for the Padres, too, that were huge, too. I mean, those were some pretty big ones.
The greatest thing about that is, I was part of the World Series championships that started the dynasty in New York. And, and they always call my home run the home run that started the dynasty.
Yeah.
And then playing for the Padres, we were able to get approval for Petco Park because of the run that we went on. They took a vote in August and they didn't have approval. We go on that run to the playoffs and get to the World Series. And even though we lost, they still had a parade in San Diego.
Oh, wow.
And I literally came back last week from the 25th reunion of the 98 team of the San Diego Padres. And when they called me to invite me, I was with Jeff Nelson, who was on the 98 Yankees.
Oh, wow.
And he looks at me and goes, "They're having a reunion for second place?" And I said, "Well, not just that, Jeff. We got Petco Park for the Padres, and they really appreciate that where they're playing now." And so I went back to San Diego for that. But yeah, that was the difference between playing in New York and San Diego. You lose a World Series in New York, you don't leave your house for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But you lose in San Diego, you still get a parade.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So real quick, so you said you're starting on radio. You said here what is that again?
But 9:70 a.m. New York, which is Joe Piscopo is our lead-in show.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's a station. It's called 970 The Answer. We were doing a streaming show on New Jersey called The King and the Cop, and it's not sports.
Yeah,
we do one sports segment because it's me, obviously, but it's The King and the Cop. My partner is a retired Newark police officer. Used to own the Newark Bears when I coached there.
Okay.
We've been friends forever. We started this little radio show just for fun. We got picked up by On New Jersey. This 970 AM saw it and they said, "Listen, we love the concept because it's not all sports. So we have a segment for sports. We have a segment where we emphasize the good things the police are doing, the good stories that are out there that most social media and everybody doesn't want to talk about. So we emphasize that, and then we have a charitable arm at the very end. And then we have my partner's a guy named Tommy Setner. His wife is a former Broadway, star and everything, singer and everything else. So she is kind of like our Robin Quivers.
Oh yeah,
that's awesome.
So she plays kind of laughing one. So she ends the segment with an entertainment segment, and they just loved the concept of the show, that it wasn't this hardcore sports show.
Right.
And so we start that on Monday for a 90-day trial run to see if we can make it work on national radio.
That's awesome. So everybody out there, you can take a listen to that. Also, I think you're on Instagram. You're also on Twitter.
The Real Jay Leyritz. Yep.
Yeah, and they can also get your book, right? Your book is that on Amazon?
So you go to my website, jimleyritz.com.
Okay.
Is where you can find everything. Yeah.
That is awesome. Jim, we know you're very, very busy, and we really you have no idea what this means to two young guys that used to watch you play and grow up, and I know the community is very proud of what you did, what you've done, and just thanks again for doing this for us. We really appreciate it.
Well, and Steve, I appreciate you guys, and again, it's always great to reminisce about the high school days and growing up in Cincinnati. And like I mentioned before, my family's still there, so I'm back there a lot. One of these days, we'll have to go to Anderson Township Pub and have a beer together.
We definitely love that.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate it. And good luck starting on Monday, and we'll definitely try to keep in touch with you. And we'll send you this link to this podcast. And is your brothers and sisters and all them, are they on social media at all that we can send it to them?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
I don't think so. My sister does a lot of ALS stuff, obviously, because she lost her husband. But yeah, I don't think they're on social media.
Okay, well, I'll send it to you in the email to let you have it and take a look at it. And good luck on Monday. And again, thanks a lot, Jim.
All right, guys. Have a great night.
All right. So for
See you,
Dan
Jim.
Albers and Steve Ellis and Jim Leyritz, you've been watching This Week in Anderson. We'll catch you guys next week.